Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist based in Harley Street in London. And I'm delighted to be joined today by the most famous diet and fitness guru in the world, on the planet, Rosemary Conley, who's just published her autobiography. It's entitled Through Thick and Thin, My Story So Far. So I know Rosemary from the past, and we have been on various TV programs together, and I've written for her magazine, and we've collaborated on various projects. And I very much enjoyed helping her when she was doing that famous dance program on TV as well, though it didn't help her that much. Did an amazing job by herself. Now, at the risk of Rosemary's ears burning or developing an ego the size of a planet, there are very few people, in fact, there's only one person, and that is Rosemary, that can do all the things that she does. And I think people take her a bit for granted. Who else can present TV programs, her own TV programs, as well as being on a guest on others, create an incredibly successful business, create a diet and fitness plan that actually works and is scientifically validated, can be a radio presenter, and can write best-selling books? I mean, the list is endless. So Rosemary, thank you very much for being on the program, and thank you very much for your wonderful, very searingly honest book, but it reads like a novel in terms of how thrilling it is to read. But let me start by asking you a psychological question, and you may run screaming from the room, but you have no background in show business or medicine or any of the things that you eventually excel at, right? And what you see again and again is these new projects come along and you just kind of say yes, you plunge in. Not everything goes right, but you survive and you keep going. There's an incredible sense of optimism about you. In my sense as a psychiatrist and reading the book, would you agree with that? And would you agree that there's something psychologically a little bit different about you that explains the fact you seem to take on these challenges, even though you have no idea where they're going to end? I mean, for example, you get approached by a national newspaper to write a column and you just say yes, and off you go. And yet these are incredibly big projects. Tell me a bit about that, this notion that you just say yes to everything and you have an incredible optimism that you'll be okay at it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't actually say yes to everything because there are lots of things that I've said no to. But I tend to be fairly optimistic, as you say. And I think I was made fairly resilient because I had quite a challenging childhood. I didn't feel it at the time. My parents were told that I wouldn't survive beyond my 10th birthday because I had chronic asthma. And back in the day, there wasn't the medication and what have you that there is now. And in fact, only recently, well, 5 years ago, I was told by my chest specialist that in fact my lungs were underdeveloped by the time I went to school, and they still are. And he also told me that if I hadn't followed a career path into fitness, my story would be very different. And so by extraordinary good fortune, I was interested. I've always been interested in exercise. I actually sort of paved my own future by being fitter, and that has enabled me to survive. And along that path, I think when you have a sort of, to say disadvantaged childhood would be wrong, because I didn't. I was brought up in a lovely, loving family, and I had space around me, and I had lots of pets and things like that. But it wasn't easy for me at school because I was the weakling and nobody wanted me in their team. And so these are the things that sort of give you that sort of resilience. But it was, I suppose, the first thing that I did that made me think, well, this could be fun, was when my friend and I wanted to organize a pet show when we were, how old were we? Probably 12. And so my mother said, well, write to the pet food manufacturers and ask them for some prizes. And I did that with my friend, and we wrote to these various companies, and they just sent shed loads of stuff. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So if you have an idea and then you ask for some help, it's incredible what you can do. And so we organized that. And that really was the first start of doing something and having the confidence to actually go ahead with a project. And I think that was my first step.
So I want to come back to your childhood because I think it is very interesting and exactly how ill you were in a moment. But you said something about how fortunate you've been, and that this is another thing that's really interesting about you. I think you never get a sense of arrogance about you or kind of grandiosity, which you and I both know from hanging out in the world of television. Many celebrities can begin to suffer from what may be called a God complex. And of course, doctors can suffer from it as well. But throughout the book, you keep describing yourself as lucky and fortunate. You keep displacing the accolade, as it were, from your own hard work. You don't personalize your success, and you're full of gratitude, for example. So tell us a bit about that. And I think this may be linked to your faith in some sense, but tell us a bit about that.
Yes, indeed. I became a committed Christian in 1986. And that was, it was a really low point in my life. I'd got a business that was closing down, and I'd sold my business to IPC magazines. And then after 4 years, they wanted to get rid of the business. So that closed down. So that was tough. I'd lost my job. I'd had a failed marriage, and then I'd had a new relationship, like 3 years in. And that was coming to an end. And then that my house was going to be on the market. And then I was ill with a gallstone problem. And in that respect, at this point, it was almost like it was a critical stage in my life where I was absolutely at rock bottom. And being there made me very open to this offer of sending for a book called Power for Living, which was being advertised in a women's magazine by Cliff Richard, Lord Tony Pandy, and Gerald Williams, the tennis commentator, saying that they had found Power for Living through a Christian faith. And if I'd like to send for this free book, I might be able to do the same. And I sent for the book, and it came, and I was being diagnosed with my gallstones. And I came back from the hospital. I knelt at the side of my bed and I prayed the prayer that was in this book and asked God into my life. And I just felt utterly washed through. And I got back into bed feeling as though all of my sins had been forgiven. I was now new. This was a new start. And I felt very strongly that God was saying to me, I'm now the chairman of your life. Just follow me. And it was this most exhilarating feeling. And within 2 days, I was proposing to my ex-boyfriend because God had told me that I should. And then we got married 4 months later, and we're still together now, and so on. And so what happened then was that because I had to avoid surgery for my gallstones, I lost weight off my hips and thighs. Long story short, I wrote a book about it, having done trials on local radio. And I knew that this diet was different. So it came out in 1988, and the hip and thigh diet was published. And it sold nearly, I think it was about 800,000 copies in the first year. I did a sequel. The sequel came out in 89. And in the first 6 weeks, it sold nearly 500,000 copies. And it went on to sell 2 million worldwide. I went on book tours, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, South Africa. It was bonkers. When something goes from me being organizing a pet show when I was 12 to suddenly being a sort of worldwide success, you realize it isn't you. You have to acknowledge that a greater power than you is in charge of this adventure. And I've never forgotten that, because I've seen people, you do have bumps in the road. I've had some bumps in the road, which I'm sure we'll come to. And it's really important that we don't get too big for our boots, because if you get too big for your boots, you're going to trip over.
So this moment of prayer where you felt a transformational change, do you think you began to behave differently afterwards? Because it sounds like you became more confident and assertive. And I love the fact that in the book you're searing the honest, you say you proposed. You're the one that proposed. And I do think it's fantastic. What could be a better sign of assertiveness than, instead of hanging around waiting for a proposal or dropping very heavy hints, which is what many people do, you just went ahead and proposed. I love that. Anyway,
well,
what are your thoughts? Did you change the way you behaved, do you think?
I think there was a confidence about me. There was no doubt there was a confidence about me when I felt that God was saying, right, I'm now in charge. And I felt cleansed and so on. So the whole thing was like a clean sheet of paper. and all the guilt stuff had gone, and so on. And I was now ready for this new wonderful journey I was going to go on. As far as the proposal is concerned, we had been engaged before. And he had said to me, if ever you wanted to do it, you'd have to ask me. So, but it was very much a question that it was the fact that God had told me to propose to him. And so that's that I should marry him, marry Mike. And so that is what I did. And I felt completely confident about that. And he was delighted. His parents were delighted. And so off we went on a whole new adventure. And I was so glad that Mike was around when this adventure unfolded, because the adventure was crazy. We were suddenly being taken to, we were given a reception at the Savoy Hotel to celebrate selling 1 million copies of the book. I mean, and was this really happening to us? It was crazy. And so I think humility is so important, because at the end of the day, we are fortunate to be on this earth. We're fortunate to be alive. And if some of us get a break and have some amazing success, we should just be so grateful. And yes, as I've said before, I think you've got to keep your feet on the ground.
So let's go back to your childhood. You were born not very well at all. I think you had eczema, and that was a problem for your mum as well. And also you had this very bad chest condition. And then you got shipped out to South Africa. So tell us a bit about all of that.
Right. Well, my parents having been told that my asthma was so bad and I wouldn't last to my 10th birthday, the doctors had said that I should go into hospital when I was 8 for 3 months and see how I would do there. And my mother didn't want me to go into hospital, so she thought it would be great if we went over to see her cousin, I think it was, who lived in South Africa. And so my granny, very generously, because it must have cost a fortune, paid for us to go for a 2-week. It was before flights. So it was a 2-week cruise down to Cape Town, and then 6 weeks in Cape Town, and then a 2-week cruise back. And so that was remarkable. And I was asked on one occasion to go, my mother took me up to the bridge, the captain's deck or whatever you want to call it. And I steered the ship for a few moments. And of course, I realized in retrospect that probably the captain had been told that this poorly child who's not going to live very long, can she come and have this momentous experience? And at the time, I just thought, oh, this is all right. And so that was it. And I did go to hospital later on that year. And past the first couple of weeks, which were grim, and you feel very lonely and all of those things, I actually adapted to it remarkably well. And I've heard this before, how extraordinarily resilient kids can be. They just adapt to whatever the surroundings are. And I made friends, and almost to the point that I was very happy there. And so I think there's a part of me, strangely, which I think adapts. I think I adapt very, very easily to whatever the situation might be. And I think I don't know whether that's a blessing or a curse, but I think that's what happens to me.
Well, of course, I'm very interested in the psychology of resilience, and this adapting thing is really important, because a classic coping skill that everyone else adopts is, why the hell has this thing happened, right? And they question it. Classically, the analogy I like to give is people sat around the deck of the Titanic going, can someone explain the iceberg to me? And what you need to do is not have the iceberg explained, you need to get off the boat. So people kind of they don't adapt, they kind of go, how on earth can this thing happen? They complain instead of adapting. And the more you complain, the less you adapt. Do you have any thoughts about that point? Because I do think it's key to coping with stress.
I mean, this is what I love talking to you, Raj, because I learn so much from you. It's a joy. And learning exactly what you've just said, it sort of says it all. And I think to some degree, I can't, it's just the way I am. I just adapt. And I think I adapt because, well, it's the sensible thing to do.
And that's another thing that happens in the book. You know, there is disaster after disaster. I mean, obviously you are very successful, you recover, but you spend about a couple of sentences to go, oh, this disaster happened. And then we moved on. We reacted. You don't go page after page. Why on earth would these terrible people do this terrible thing to me? I mean, a good example is the Central TV program you were on, where they slightly stitched you up a bit and they invited you on and didn't tell you. They had some very argumentative guests, and they were going to make some allegations which weren't true. And you about a paragraph about how they stitch you up, but then you move quickly along. You don't spend time venting your spleen. Could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, well, having gone on to this program, it was all to do with fitness videos as they were then, and it was Elle Macpherson was the body. And there was some controversy about some of the moves and exercises that she was recommending. And so I was on with Jane Irving, who used to be a weather girl and had also done a fitness video, and the Green Goddess, Diana Moran, and myself. Now, when all of us had at some point done videos before we were qualified to teach exercise, and they were trying to highlight the fact that if you weren't a qualified exercise teacher, then you shouldn't be doing these fitness videos, and that you were dangerous and people would hurt themselves. And I was fuming because when this bloke was saying to me that he'd got somebody who he knew had injured themselves through one of my videos, I just knew it wasn't true. And I laid into him and I pointed my finger, wagged my finger at him. And I said, I can't remember, but I've written this in the book, how dare you say, I know that that's not true. How dare you say that? Nobody would be hurt by one of my videos. Can't remember the exact words. Remembered it when I wrote the book. And my daughter, when she was watching it, she said, I can't believe you were so cross, Mum. I've never seen you that cross before. And the crazy thing was that Mr. Blokey, who was accusing me, didn't speak to me again. He was obviously completely frightened to death of me from that moment on, which if he'd got some genuine accusation, he would have come back at me. And it's so pathetic. And I'm sort of, something my husband said to me the other day, I think it was probably in the last year, I said, I always believed in myself. And I have always believed in myself. I don't know why, but I have. And Mike said to me, he said, that's an amazing quality for you to be always believe in yourself. And he said, where did that come? I don't know. I just always did. So let's,
let's go back to you being ill as a child. Do you think that changed your relationship to fitness or your body? That you developed a sense of wanting to look after your body, or you didn't take it for granted? Or you see, one of the issues I think is people abuse their bodies in a sense. When people overeat or drink too much and so on, they're kind of abusing the most precious thing we have. And there's also a sense of which I think you have a reverence for the body. And I just wonder if that, to some extent, maybe something to do with your childhood experience of illness. I don't know.
Well, that's an interesting one. I wouldn't say that it did, because when I was a child, I didn't know that I was likely to die. So that sort of wasn't a sort of sword of Damocles hanging over me. The interesting thing is that now at 75, very much, I want to absolutely maximize every blooming day of my life. And I want to live as many days as I can. Because I love my life and I'm at the best part of my life now. I love being this age because I've done all this sort of striving and the big projects and so on. And, I'm in a fortunate financial position, so I don't have to strive in that respect. And I just love my life. And I love, for moments like this, talking to you, Raj, I just love it. And all these privileges that sort of come along my way. So that's not answering your question. I forgot what the question was. It wasn't really from childhood. Childhood.
But I want to go back to your childhood because there's a lovely moment in the book where we can see the business brain beginning to develop in Rosemary Conley, which is she buys a doll, right, which she's very attached to. It's very expensive. I think it's £2, which is a lot of money back in the day. Something like that. I can't remember the exact amount.
It was £2. It's
Yeah.
£2.50.
You love the doll. You're very attached to it. But then someone else comes along and wants the doll, and you suggest a deal, I think, or they suggest a deal, and you sell the doll and you make a profit. This is the first business deal, I think, and I think it sets the ball rolling for the future. Because the other thing is that many people, they go to medical school and have lots of academic qualifications, but to be successful in business is a whole nother thing. What are your thoughts about this first deal that you did, and what does it tell us, if anything, about yourself?
Well, I remember now, it cost me £2, and this is 1955. So I don't know quite how much that equates to today.
It's a lot of money, though. A lot of money.
Yes, it would have been, without a doubt. And so I spent all of my holiday money on that doll. And to me, that doll was just the world. And this is what happens sometimes when you're a child. You think that something is just the best thing ever, and you don't mind. Now your life is complete, having got, in this case, my doll. And then, so I played with it. I was obviously on the ship, and I sort of played with it and what have you. And I probably sort of played with it for 2, 3, 4 weeks, however many weeks it was. Then this cousin, a distant cousin relative came, this child came over and saw the doll, was absolutely smitten by it. And I thought, I think there was probably an element of the nice side of me thinking, well, she really, really loves it. So that's nice. How can I make her happy? And then the other part of me thinking, well, I've spent all my spending money, I've got nothing left. Maybe if I sold it and for a bit more, and I must have been, because my mother and my father were both, my father was definitely in sales, so I must have picked up something over time. And so I thought, right, well, you can pay me £2.50 for it if you really want it. And that's what she did. And I made a gain and had my enjoyable time with the doll. And then I was now refurbished with £2.50, not 250, £2.50 for the rest of my time. So that was my first deal. And there was another deal later when I bought a bike. And I did the bike up and I sold that for a profit. So there was a bit of a theme going on there.
Yeah. And I think there's something very interesting, because amongst all your many achievements is you are a deal maker, a very successful businesswoman in your own right. But the deals you make, they're always a sense in which you're trying to look after the customer. You're trying to look after the client. I mean, with the franchising deals, for example, you quite clearly, and it comes through in the book, and I know from knowing you personally, you're trying to make sure that anyone who's in a business deal with you is actually going to benefit. And we both know that in many businesses, they're out to shaft their customers. So there's a kernel of what becomes you, the businesswoman, in the future, which is you're trying to make sure your customers are getting a good deal. That's actually, seems to me, one of the starting points before you do any business. Is the customer actually going to benefit from this?
Exactly right. And to some degree, I would say that I'm not a terribly good businesswoman, because a good business person would probably go shaft and just collect the money off the franchisees and let them go out there and see how they get on. But from my point of view, I had my name, my reputation over the door. And so therefore, we only allowed somebody to buy a franchise who I knew would be the right personality, who would care about their members and would deliver a first-class service to them. And that was such a joy to do, because what's happened, I mean, even with the book coming out now, I've had somebody who was one of my first franchisees, so we're talking almost 30 years ago now, and wrote to me last week to say how thrilled she was to read the book. And how much she enjoyed running one of our diet and fitness clubs and so on. And so this was all about enjoyment. I wanted to have wonderful franchisees who were the best trained in the land, who would go out there and be fantastic ambassadors for the Rosemary Conley brand, and that the members would love it. Just as my members now, I still take classes 50 years on a Monday night. And my ladies, many of them been coming 40 years, are my friends. We now, only last night, in fact, yesterday afternoon, I did a photo shoot for the Sunday Times. And we had some of my members come. We've got 3 who are in their 80s, 4 who are in their 70s, one in their 60s, a young one, 62. And basically, I said to them when on the 1st of October, where I'm going to scrap all charges for the class. You could all come for free because we need this. We all need this with this sort of energy crisis that we're all going through. I don't want you to be thinking, well, that's an extra luxury I could be giving up. For this very tiny amount that it's going to cost me for the room hire, and for the fact that, yes, it's good for me to go and be with them on a Monday night. It's good for their mental health. It's good for their physical health. It's good for friendship. It's good for general well-being. And it's that kind of heart that I have got, for sure, to make people feel this is good. And that's really important to me.
But you don't just talk the talk, and like many people who advocate weight loss or diet and fitness, you walk the walk. And it all begins with you attending a diet class yourself and figuring out that actually this wasn't working, because I think the calorie deficit was too big. I think there were only 1,000 calories you were allowed. And you decided off your own bat to up the calories, I think to 1,400, I think it was, something like that. I can't remember the exact number.
That's right.
And then you discovered that you were still losing weight, but you weren't binging because you weren't starving. And then gradually, bit by bit, you moved into understanding a lot more about diet and fitness and writing these famous books. So tell us a bit more about that beginning of that journey, because it's actually about you being overweight in your view, though you weren't actually clinically obese.
It all started when basically I had a medical with, for some extraordinary reason, I was taking out a life policy. I was only 18, but nevertheless, I know, it's just bonkers, but nevertheless, I thought it was a good idea. It was obviously the sort of thing my parents did. So therefore I thought, well, I better do it then. I'm now in a job. I'll go and do this. So I go and see this doctor, medical doctor, and he does various, weighs me and all that sort of stuff. And then he disappeared out the room for 20 minutes. And I was so bored, I looked at what he'd written, and he described me as well covered. Well, to an 18-year-old, that means fat. There's no question about it. And so on that basis, I went away shocked that I was fat. At the time, I probably weighed 8.5 stone. And so when that just completely triggered something in my brain, which made me weight conscious. And then I got married at 21. And my first husband and I, we'd had a separation before we got married. And then whilst we loved each other, the marriage didn't really work. And we were married for 13 years and we had a wonderful daughter. So it wasn't, I can't say it didn't work at all, because it obviously did. But it didn't work in this sort of affirming way that perhaps most housewives would need. And so I turned to food for comfort. And so that's really where, and I ended up, long story short, I ended up putting 2.5 stone on. And I found that by going on, because in those days you go to the doctor saying, I need to lose some weight, they give you this 1,000 calorie diet sheet, which was ridiculous. And I worked out my own 1,400 calorie diet and found on that basis, I actually could lose weight. And amazingly, gradually, I did lose the weight and became completely fascinated with the whole subject. And then thought, do you know what? I can help other people do this. And so I started with half a dozen neighbours in my kitchen. And then the following 2 months later, we went to the local village hall. My initial investment, £8 for 30 posters, 1972. 29 people joined. I got my doctor to approve my diet, say that it was medically sound. And I did slimming and good grooming. And these 29 lovely ladies turned up, weighed them, gave them a talk on how to make the most of themselves. Next week, they came back again with more people. Slimmer of the week, 11 pounds in a week. Unbelievable. And I suddenly thought, I can do this. This is great. And that was the beginning of my whole business in the point of weight and health and fitness.
But unlike many people in this area, you've also been quite interested in making sure that what you do is valid in a scientific sense. You've been very interested to make sure that it actually makes sense medically and scientifically, because you and I both know there are many people in this space that are out to make money from people's desire to lose weight, and they do it in a slightly cavalier fashion. They just do things that maybe grab headlines without being bothered about the scientific validity. Tell us a bit about that, your interest in the science to make sure it's valid, what you do.
Well, as soon as I became qualified to teach exercise to music, and that came about because I got my own TV series on BBC One daytime, and I was doing these exercises similar to what I've been teaching in my classes since the late 70s. And was teaching recording videos and stuff to go on the telly, and then people were writing to say she hasn't got a clue what she's talking about. She's saying that this exercise is doing this and it's not. And so when the BBC got complaints about me, I then thought, right, well, I need to get qualified then. And I was terribly busy at the time, but nevertheless, I thought I must do this. Now, once I became qualified, I suddenly became right. Everything we do has got to be absolutely scientifically correct. And so I then brought on other people. Professor Andrew Prentice was the first person that I spoke to, and then to Professor Susan Jebb. And I wanted these people. So Susan Jebb, I asked to look at my books, as later on, to make sure when I brought in low GI and things like that, I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about. And so I was prepared to pay people to actually check these things, and to make sure that I couldn't be criticised that I actually got it all wrong. And so, from my point of view, it was an investment. My investment in making sure things were correct. And the same when we launched our magazine in 1996, I brought on the very best people to advise, and the magazine lasted 18 years. And I was very proud of the fact you wrote for me, Raj, and I loved your column. It was my favourite column of the whole magazine, because I love the whole subject of psychology. I think if I was an academic, which I'm not, but if I were, psychology is what I would be studying. And then we had, of course, a nutrition scientist in Professor Susan Jebb, and we had a professor of physiology and so on. And we had Dr. Hilary Jones. So we had really top people writing for us, because I wanted everything that we wanted in the magazine to be accurate. And I remember our editor, Jerry Hosier, who was such a lively, I love Jerry. And she would bring me something that was in the mail or whatever it might have been, and said, oh, this is all about these foods and more healthy, and they do this for you and that for you. And I said, well, hang on a minute. I need to get these checked out, because I'm not convinced that they do. And I asked Susan Jebb, are these two? No, absolute not. So I'm dead against just coming up with headlines to make it look and sound interesting when it's just garbage.
So, you started off by actually testing your approach as well. I think you did a little trial yourself. And I think your approach has been tested by other scientists. So you're very interested in the notion of testing and checking that you're right. Could you say something about that? Because most people wouldn't want to subject themselves to that kind of scrutiny.
Well, as far as many of my diets, I did trials. Now, we're not talking a clinical trial where people are under sort of controlled environment. And there's, there's all the different things that scientists do. But what I did want to do is, if I was going to write a book, I needed some evidence that it did work with other people. And so I did numerous trials like that. And so from my point of view, I was able to write about what people said. I could write about the results and genuinely present them as, this is what happened with these 50 people that went on this diet, filled in questionnaires, got weighed every week. And at the end of a month, they lost a stone. The average was, it's 50 people lost 50 stone. So therefore, the average lost a stone in a month rather. And so, but then it came to, with the hip and thigh diet, which was 1986, and it came out in 88. Of course, the scientists really didn't like that, because I didn't know as much as I do now then. And also because I was sort of advocating that you could spot reduce. Well, of course, we know you can't spot reduce. But what I was advocating was that if you were somebody who was hippie, so you were heavy hips and thighs, if you went onto this low-fat diet, you would lose weight off your hips and thighs. And they did. They did in their millions, because that's why I sold 2 million copies of the book. You wouldn't sell 2 million copies of the book if it didn't work. People aren't stupid. And of course, I subsequently wrote, so it was only people with big hips and thighs that bought it, obviously. So I adopted the same principles to do the flat stomach plan, because then people with big tummies bought that one. And yes, it worked for them as well, because they had big tummies and that's where their fat was. And it wasn't rocket science. And I just thought, I wonder where they got the funding for scientists to go and try and disprove what I was trying to do. And the interesting thing was that Professor Andrew Prentice was so cross with some of the scientists, because scientists didn't like me because I was just little me. And yet Andrew could see the bigger picture. He said, she's selling books that is basically a healthy diet. She's teaching exercise in exercise videos that's working. They're completely safe and effective. She's writing columns in magazines that is completely appropriate. And she's got a slot every week on national television. And he said, do a pie chart. And I went to spoke at this Association for the Study of Obesity, the ASO conference. And he said, I want you to show them how many millions of people you are reaching every week. And that was the point. You see, and he said to these scientists, for goodness sake, get off your academic high horse and just see that this person is reaching 1 million times more people than we are and is actually doing some good.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about the fact that in this space, because it's a big business, ever since you've come along, lots of other people have come along, and they're trying to flog something, and they're trying to flog the idea that it's simple and it's easy, and you just got to do this thing or that thing, and then you'll be fine. So they're snake oil salesmen, but you've never disguised the fact, and I think you do this very inspirationally. There will be work, okay, and there will be a sense in which it's a project. So what are your thoughts about the rest of the industry? I mean, I know you're a very kindly person. You won't want to slag anyone off in particular. But do you agree there are a lot of snake oil salesmen? And what do you think is the psychology? Because I think people are looking for a quick fix, basically. And there is no quick fix. And although what you advocate is doable, it still requires a bit of work. And the fact is you turn up to the classes yourself. And that's what's so inspirational. You didn't just write a book and then put your feet up. You actually walk the walk as well as talk the talk. But what are your thoughts about the rest of the space that you're in, as it were, and what the other people are up to?
I think it's fascinating that there are all kinds of ideas that come up, because everybody, it's a big industry. There's no question about it. 65% of the population are overweight. So what bigger market are you ever likely to be able to reach to sell your wares and make yourself a fortune? And I do despair sometimes when something absolutely bonkers is, I remember Bylin tea. I mean, Bylin, these special tea bags that you drink this tea and it made you slim. I mean, I've never heard such garbage in all my life. And it was just bonkers. I'm sure he made a fortune, but you have to, people aren't stupid. Well, you would like to think they're not stupid, because it's all a question of physics. If you're overweight, you've eaten too much food and you've not done enough activity to get the balance right. If you want to lose that weight, you've got to adjust the food that you're eating, and you need to burn off some of those calories by being more active. And it's not rocket science. The key, though, is finding a formula that works for you as an individual. That's the clever bit. Now, where it worked for me and how I was, I think, so successful is because I wasn't a film star. I wasn't a doctor. I was just an ordinary woman. And I did exercises that there were lots of people who could do fantastic exercise videos, really complicated, impressive to watch and so on. But most women couldn't do that, but they could do what I could do, which because I wasn't terribly good insofar as I can do a workout, but it's not complicated because I can't do complicated workouts. I'm not a dancer. And that's why my videos sold in their millions, because Mrs. Blogs at home could relate to me. I wasn't skinny. I wasn't 6 feet tall. I was just ordinary. And I tried to communicate with them in a way that was personable, with no gimmicks, no giggly bits, no jokes, or because it's after the second time you've heard it's really irritating. And I sort of did it. We were all joining in a class in your living room, and that worked. So when it comes to, now there's an interesting point here, Raj, because I've often been asked, what did I think about fitness videos that were done by celebrities? And I would always say, well, if it gets that person off the sofa because they like this soap star a lot and they move around and enjoy working out with that soap star, fantastic. As long as it's safe, fantastic. I have no issue with that whatsoever. But when it comes to selling some too good to be true product to lose weight, then the clue is in the title. It's too good to be true.
So let's talk a bit about personal transformation and personal change, because that's really the business that you're in and you're very successful at it, helping people change and transform themselves. That's the world that psychiatry and psychology and doctors are in. And in this more academic world, where these people have had academic training, they've been to university, the reality is no one teaches them how to do that thing, right? Get people to change. And you're very successful at that. And that is something to do with inspiration. There's a magic X factor, which is difficult to bottle, and you don't get taught at universities. And you and I both know that GPs, whose job it is, and bless their cotton socks, they know much more medicine than I do, but they're not particularly good at getting people to lose weight. The 6 minutes or the 12 minutes of the consultation, and yet this is a national emergency, a national crisis. What would do more to help the health of the nation in general and reduce the burden on the NHS is for people to become fitter. So what are your thoughts about this? Because basically people in medicine, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists get burnt out quite quickly. And you've always stayed relentlessly optimistic, because ultimately people turn up, they want a quick fix, and they miss the key point. They're going to have to do something different to what they were doing before. And that means they are going to have to change. And you're very good at staying relentlessly optimistic, and you're very inspirational. What are your thoughts about that notion? You're in the job of personal change. Doctors are, but doctors are usually hopeless at it compared to yourself.
I think I'm going to talk about the doctors first of all, because I don't know how doctors can possibly get somebody to lose weight other than to say, if you don't lose weight, you're going to have a heart attack, you're going to be dead in 3 weeks. Because unless you're given a sort of shock like that, they're not going to take any notice, because they're not giving them the tools. They haven't got the time. Of course they haven't, for goodness sake. I mean, I have the most fantastic doctor who is just amazing. And I do not know how he copes. Because the problem with many patients is that they go to the doctor because they're not well. The doctor said, right, do this, take this, do what have you. And they don't do it because, no, I don't like taking tablets. And I would go insane with having, to deal with people like that. And if you did some exercise, your joints wouldn't hurt so much. Yes, but it hurts when I do use my joint. Yes, but that's because you're not active. So you need to break through that, and then you will feel better. Oh no, and that's not right. I'm going to sit on the sofa. And it's that sort of frustrating thing that doctors have to put up with. So as far as weight loss is concerned, goodness me, no wonder they can't manage that one terribly easily, because people don't want to be told eat less and do more. Because it's exactly what they don't want to do. But I think the doctor's role there is to frighten them into, you've got to do this. And I know that a friend of mine has a practice nurse, and she quite simply said, right, John, I'll see you in a week. This is what you've got to do, and this is how much exercise you've got to do, and blood tests, the whole thing. I'll see you in a week, and then we'll see how you're doing. And he's lost 3.5 stone. Because she is on his case, means it, and he's got a relationship. And that's what makes the difference. And so I am really impressed by that way that worked. Now, in my class situation, I can't make anybody lose weight. All I can do is to encourage them. and to say well done when they do. And I've got one or two people who would love to go to our class. We don't do the classes anymore other than my own. And I'll say, look, because we do the wonderful newsletter every week through our website, rosemaryconley.com. And the newsletter goes out to a couple of thousand people every Friday. And we get correspondence saying how much people love it and so on. And between Mary Morris, who's my other half of doing the newsletter and is talked about in the book. I'm going to digress here. Mary Morris was it was one of the supposedly other side when I was on the Central TV show to be against the people who had we unqualified fitness people. And she refused to go on because she thought, well, yes, but we've become qualified now. She said, that's absolutely wrong. I'm not going to do that. And bless her, she's actually stood up to the producers. No, I'm not doing that. And so she sat in the audience. Anyway, Mary and I have been friends now for 30 years. And what we do in the newsletter is try and encourage and give the sort of facts and the information and the motivation to help people to lose weight and get fitter if they want to. Now, one of these lovely ladies is in communication with me on WhatsApp, and she needs to lose about 2.5 stone. And she said, I don't know what to say. I'm so depressed that her husband's even been diagnosed with dementia. So I understand that. Of course, she's stressed and everything, and the future is gloomy. Of course it is. So the least I can do is to say, look, let's try and do it. Tell me how you get on every week, and I will just acknowledge and say well done or encourage you or whatever. So what we've done is we're doing little goals. And so she's lost her first half stone now, which is fantastic. So she's just above the 12 stone mark. She's about 12 stone 1, something like that. And so I said, right, your next goal is to get under 12 stone. If it's 11 stone something, that's your next goal. Now she can do that. That's 2 pounds she's got to lose. Small goal. And then we'll go on to the next bit. Now, and this is what I say in my class. That's why you're under 10 stone. That's fantastic. So now we need to make sure that that's definitely under 10 stone or 12 stone or whatever it might be, so that your body is used to being in this lower weight bracket. And let's go, and then you think, wow, you've actually do realize you've now lost a stone. That's fantastic. So it's small increments and that little bit of encouragement, and not dictating. You cannot say, well, you've got to do this or you lose. I don't like saying you've got to lose 7 pounds in the next month. I think that's because you're doomed to failure. Because if something happens and you think, oh, I've blown it, I've now got to lose 7 pounds in a week. And that's when you start starving yourself, and that's bad news. So encouragement is where I'm at.
So this is a very important point about the psychology of transformation, personal change, and weight loss, which is that you mentioned a relationship. And one of the problems is GPs today don't have a relationship with their patients for various reasons. You often don't see the same GP. In your classes, there is a relationship that develops. Now, yep. I know you to be a very kindly person because I know you personally, but I would have to say that if I was attending your class, I would be a bit scared of you. And I think there's something that all therapists need: the ability to dispense a bit of tea and sympathy, but they also need the steel hand in the velvet glove. There is a sense in which you don't shy away from brutal honesty, right? And I think you're also a bit tough and a bit scary as a result. I mean, don't take that the wrong way, but I think that's part of what works. So what do you think about that? That we live in a culture, particularly when it comes to weight and people's appraisal of each other, where we shy away from brutal honesty, and therapists often just dispense tea and sympathy, an infinite tea and sympathy, whereas actually sometimes people need a bit of steel. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's true, and there are occasions when I will come out with that steel glove and say,
I'm scared right now as you say that. Anyway, go on.
And I will say to somebody, look, why do you come to the class? This isn't working, is it? And so, come on, let's just see something this week. I need you to go for a walk every day. I need you to not eat your snacks. I need you to, not whatever. And I'll just give sort of 2 or 3 simple pointers. or here's a diet sheet, write it down for this week. Let me see what you've done for next week. And then see what happens. But I'm not going to go any further than that, because I can't. I would encourage enormously when somebody loses, and we all clap in the class when, you know, we go through I never read out weight gains, but we do the weight losses, and we applaud each other. And you know, we're just, for instance, with the newsletter this week, we're launching a 2-week challenge, and the idea of that is that we're all doing it together. It's a 2-week challenge, and so right, let's do this. It's only 2 weeks, and I love the fact it's only 2 weeks. If you say it's a month, it's too long, but a 2-week challenge is brilliant, because with a 2-week challenge, you think, well, I've only got to be really good for 2 weeks, and I'll make the effort to go a bit extra walk, and I'll go uphill a bit, and so on, and the results. And then you get 2 weeks, because the fact of the matter is, you go on any sort of program, you lose most of the weight the first week, and a bit the second week, and then it tails off. So let's grab those 2 weeks, and let's do those 2 weeks, do them really well, and see how well you've done. And then you've learned good habits. And then with those good habits, you think, well, that wasn't that difficult, was it? We can carry on some of those habits.
So the other thing that I know from observing many of the ladies and the people who do your classes is the personal transformation, the mental health transformation. It is quite impressive how people cheer up enormously and develop a sense of well-being as a result of losing weight. They feel better about themselves. So I believe that a large part of what you do does have a mental health impact. The statistics are that 1 in 6 people in this country are on antidepressants, and they turn up to the doctor, they're low, and the doctor gives them a tablet. Whereas in fact, we need to examine why are they low. Quite often they're low about themselves and their appearance, and if they lost weight and became more confident, it would impact them in terms of relationships. So what about that transformation in terms of the mental health impact? Because you've seen that, and I think that's partly one of the things you're a bit addicted to, to my sense from the book. You just love the fact that people feel, you know, you see a sense of well-being in people, and that's one of the things I think drives you forward. But what are your thoughts about that aspect? There's a big mental health dimension to what you do, I think.
Massively, absolutely massively. And I can illustrate this with, I have a member who has a daughter, disabled daughter, who's the daughter's 50. So that she's for 50 years, this lady has been looking after her daughter. And she recently, about 18 months ago, became a grandparent to a lovely little boy who basically was born, not with special needs, but he was born with all kinds of physiological issues which needed to be sorted out, which he will get sorted. He had to lose half his lung, and he got a hernia. His intestines were up in his lung space, and so on. Really, this poor child was in hospital for a year, and this lovely member, let's call her Anne. Anne was holding the family together. The parents of the child were just about at the edge, and poor old Anne was looking after her daughter at home, and it was just overwhelming. And she came to the class and she looked ragged, and we were all so pleased to see her. And this was sort of lockdown was now easing, she'd come to the class and what have you. So we did our workout, half an hour doing our workout. At the end of that workout, that lady was a completely different person. And she went home, and she came back to the next week. She said, I went home and John said to me, my goodness me, you look a different person than the one that went out. And it was 2 things. One, it was in a community outside of the house, people, friends who cared. And the second one, she'd done 30 minutes of exercise. And at the time she was working 2 hours in Tesco's on the bread counter. And she was coming to my class, and she said one day, she said, if it wasn't for my 2 hours at Tesco and it wasn't for Rosemary's class, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on bonkers. And so just going and doing some sort of exercise, it's the exercise and doing it with somebody is so critical. And even sticking a video on, which we've got loads of videos on our website, rosemaryconley.com. You can do that. and you're part of a group, you're with somebody doing it, and that gives you help. So get some social activity and exercise. It will help you.
So you've always been very careful when you did your franchising company to select people very carefully. It's quite impressive in the book how much time you took to make sure anyone representing you or being a franchisee in the diet and fitness clubs would actually be good at what they do. You went through a very careful interview, quite onerous interview process to select people carefully. To what extent do you think, again, asking a psychological question, there's a group therapy element to the classes? To what extent do you think people bond with each other a bit? And that's part of what helps people achieve personal change, and therefore that's slightly more powerful than people having to do it by themselves. Is there a group therapy element to it, do you think?
Oh, without question of a doubt, it's enormous. And you only need to see somebody who's been struggling a bit suddenly be Slimmer of the Week, and everybody is euphoric for them. You said, blimey, amazing. Well, I mean, it's that camaraderie, and it's also that understanding, it's that empathy that we share that makes all the difference. And I think all of those things, the mental and the empathy and all of those things, and the conversation, the chats, and it's just, and you can go in with your, I've been to the doctors, I've got to go and have this done. And everybody's, oh, good, I hope it goes all right, and all that kind of element. And we actually started during lockdown, we had started with a WhatsApp group, a closed WhatsApp group. And every morning I would put a fitness challenge on for them. And they just kept each other going for the whole of this 16 months that we didn't run the classes. And there was that community, and the friendship that was created in that is now so much greater than it ever was before. I love my classes so much more. I did two half-hour exercise sessions and 2 1.5 sessions when the people are there. And they are so special. And going and having that community element to it, got to have the right atmosphere, got to have the right leader, got to have the right teacher, because there's no point in just sitting around all looking miserable. That's no good to anybody, and getting weighed. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about going into an environment where you've got a leader who's got a little bit of personality and a bit of care. And if you've got that, then suddenly you're in a great group and you become friends.
So then in the story of your life, COVID happens and there's a lockdown, and you produce this interesting book about immunity, about eating to help with immunity. Tell us a bit about that book, because that also has become a bestseller.
The 28-day immunity plan was a collaboration between myself and Mary Morris. Mary is the academic, so she did all the sort of research into the how you boost your immune system, and then told me which bits to read. I worked out the eating plan, and she worked out a progressive fitness plan. And we did it as an ebook initially, because my agent said, well, you've got to produce something in 6 weeks so it can be an ebook before COVID all gets its history, not knowing that it was going to be still carrying on 2.5 years on. And so we did that, and then it went to paperback, so we had to double how much we'd written. But then something rather extraordinary happened, that I was contacted by Leicestershire Police in the January of 2021. And they asked if I would help the Leicestershire Police Force to become healthier and fitter. Well, given such a massive, where do you go with this? I decided the best thing would be to do a trial. So I said, well, why don't we do a trial of 20 people following the 28-day immunity plan? And you have a set of portion pots, a magic measure, which measures how many inches you're losing, and the book, which gives you the eating plan. And then let's see, we will sort of do the way that then weigh in at the beginning. We'll do an intermediate catch up on, it was all on Zoom, obviously. And then we did the end one. Well, the average weight loss in the 28 days was 10.5 pounds, which was extraordinary. But instead of it being 20 people, 37 people had done it. And that was the average of 37 people. But the most extraordinary result, something that I hadn't even thought about, was the fact that they had asked the people, the wellness team at the Leicestershire Police had asked them to write down at the beginning what their wellness score was out of 10. And the average across the 37 was 4 out of 10. In 28 days, it went from 4 out of 10 to 9 out of 10, just because they were eating healthily, they were exercising every day, they weren't drinking alcohol during that time, except at special occasions, no snacking, and making sure they were going for a walk every day. And it was like a light bulb going on for them, because at the end of the 28 days, they said, please, can we carry on? I can't believe how well I sleep. I can't believe how much energy I've got. I can't believe how well I feel. It's quite extraordinary how it made them feel. We're launching the next one, the Team 4, next week, which is amazing. So it really has changed their lives.
So, Rosemary, thank you very much for talking to us. We're running out of time. We've only got like 1.5 minutes left. But in that time, thank you very much indeed again for talking to us. Just a reminder, so I don't forget, Rosemary Conley, the book is entitled Through Thick and Thin, My Story So Far, published by SPCK. You just mentioned people sleeping better, for example. I mean, a large amount of problems people go to doctors with and get prescriptions for could be solved, mental health, sleeping, etc., just by a healthier lifestyle and more sensible eating. In the 50 seconds we've got left, could you say something about that?
Without a doubt, it's about eating healthily and not drinking too much, and exercise. Exercise is like a super saver bank account that pays double dividends. It helps you to burn fat, it burns calories, it helps you to lose weight, and it helps your body less able to retain fat. And so what's not to like about doing exercise? So if you want to lose weight, yes, you have to be careful what you're eating and not eat between meals. Stop snacking. If the whole country stopped snacking, we would not have an obesity problem, in my view. And if we started cooking our own food rather than sending out for it, that would make such a difference. So those are my simple things. And your mental health would feel so much better if you were healthier inside and out.
Rosemary Conley, CBE, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Raj. It's been an absolute pleasure.